Let's imagine a specific moment in history. The time is 12:37 in the afternoon on July 20th, 1944. A briefcase is sitting on the floor under a large map table. Inside that briefcase, a silent and deadly process is happening. Acid is slowly eating its way through a thin wire. When that wire finally breaks, it will trigger a detonator connected to 2 pounds of powerful plastic explosive made by the British. In about 60 seconds, one of two things will happen. Adolf Hitler will be killed instantly, or he will walk away from the blast with little more than his trousers singed. The single thing that would determine the course of history was a thick oak table leg, about 2 inches wide, that no one was paying any attention to. We need to go back in time to understand how the entire fate of World War II came to rest on this one moment. This is the story of Operation Valkyrie, the most daring attempt to overthrow a leader from the inside during the Second World War. This is not a superhero movie. It's a true story about a messy, high-stakes plan put together by a group of unlikely conspirators. These were German noblemen who had once supported Hitler, generals who were willing to break their most serious promises to their country, and even wives who sent loving letters to their husbands that only arrived after those men had been arrested by the secret police. If you stay with this story, you will learn exactly why the bomb didn't work as planned, why the government in Berlin wasn't taken over in the 4 critical hours that followed, and why a single table leg is an important reminder of how even small things can change the world. Are you ready? Let's begin. Claus von Stauffenberg was not a man of humble beginnings. He was born in a castle in Bavaria, a castle that was already 600 years old before the United States even existed as a country. His upbringing was filled with activities like horseback riding and reading poetry, and he was taught that serving his country, Germany, was the most important duty. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Stauffenberg and others like him thought that this loud and intense man could help restore order to Germany, and that the traditional leaders could control him. But things changed. When Germany invaded Poland, he heard stories about mass shootings of civilians, but he thought they were probably just rumors being exaggerated. In 1940, during the invasion of France, he was a brave soldier and even earned the Iron Cross for his actions. But then came the war on the Eastern Front in 1941. He saw firsthand that SS death squads were forcing civilians into large pits and murdering them, while regular German army officers just stood by and watched. This deeply troubled him. He wrote a letter home asking, "If we win the war by doing things like this, what is the meaning of our victory?" Then, in April of 1943, his own life was changed forever. A British fighter plane attacked his staff car and he was severely injured. He lost his left eye, his right hand was gone, and on his left hand, only 2 fingers remained. While he was lying in a hospital in Munich recovering, he made a decision. He decided that the man leading Germany from Berlin no longer deserved his loyalty. The uniform he had worn with so much pride now represented something he could not support. This was the turning point where Claus von Stauffenberg went from being a loyal soldier to a man who would try to assassinate his own leader. The story has a very ironic twist. The plan to overthrow Hitler was named Valkyrie, but this was not a name the plotters invented in some secret basement meeting. Operation Valkyrie was actually Hitler's own official emergency plan. It was designed to keep the German government in control in case there was a major crisis or uprising. A man named Colonel General Olbricht realized that this plan could be turned against its creator. He saw that if Hitler was suddenly dead, the conspirators could activate the Valkyrie plan themselves and claim that a rogue faction of the SS had killed the Führer, allowing them to take control of the country. Olbricht brought another key person into the plot, Henning von Treschow. Treschow had already tried to kill Hitler before by putting a bomb disguised as a gift of brandy on his plane, but the bomb failed to explode. The plotters knew they needed someone who could get physically close to Hitler, someone who was respected and charismatic. Claus von Stauffenberg, who had just been promoted to a new position as Chief of Staff for the replacement army, was the perfect candidate. His job gave him direct access to Hitler. By the end of 1943, the group of plotters had grown. It included Ludwig Beck, a former army chief who had resigned in protest of Hitler's policies. and Karl Goerdeler, the former mayor of the city of Leipzig. They called their secret group Secret Germany. Their goal was clear: kill Hitler, take over the government, and then try to make peace with the Allied forces in the West before the Soviet army could advance and take over all of Europe. The chances of success were very low. The German army was losing badly on the Eastern Front, and the Gestapo secret police were getting closer to discovering the plot every day. It was a race against time. The weapon the plotters chose was a type of British plastic explosive. It was a putty-like substance that could be easily molded and had a strange smell, like marzipan. Stauffenberg's assistant, a lieutenant named Werner von Heften, carried the explosives in a cigar box. To avoid suspicion, the box was labeled as medicinal brandy. The plan involved using 2 pounds of this explosive with 2 separate fuses. Each fuse was a simple chemical timer, a glass capsule that, when crushed, would release acid. The acid would then eat through a wire over a period of about 10 minutes. Once the wire snapped, a spring would hit a firing pin and the bomb would detonate. However, there was a major problem. The day of the assassination attempt was very hot, and the heat in Hitler's headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair, would slow down the chemical reaction of the acid. This meant the 10-minute timer would actually run longer. Stauffenberg had to practice how to arm the bomb using only the 3 fingers he had left on his one remaining hand. He used a special pair of pliers wrapped in felt to quietly crush the glass capsules. He could do it in about 45 seconds if he wasn't interrupted. The bomb itself was hidden in a standard brown leather briefcase, which was scuffed and looked ordinary. It had a secret compartment at the bottom, just 2 centimeters deep, to hold the explosive putty. The original plan was to arm both pounds of explosives to create a massive blast, keeping a second bomb as a backup. But on the day of the attempt, their flight was late, which meant they only had time to prepare 1 bomb. This left them with only 1 chance to succeed, and the fate of that chance would depend on a simple oak table leg. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Stauffenberg and his aide, Heften, took off from Berlin in a Heinkel 111 airplane. At 7 a.m., they landed at the Wolf's Lair, a heavily guarded command center hidden in a forest and protected by around 50,000 landmines. At 10:15 a.m., the first problem arose. Field Marshal Keitel informed Stauffenberg that the military briefing had been moved up from 1 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. This was because the Italian dictator Mussolini was scheduled to arrive at 3 p.m. This was the first domino to fall, as it gave Stauffenberg much less time to prepare. At 10:30 a.m., Stauffenberg and Heften went into a storage room to arm the bomb. Stauffenberg managed to crush the first fuse, starting the timer, but he decided not to arm the second bomb because it was too risky and noisy. At 11 a.m., Stauffenberg entered the briefing room. It was a wooden hut, not a concrete bunker as originally planned, which would affect the blast. At 12:30 p.m., he carefully placed the briefcase with the armed bomb under the massive oak map table, positioning it very close to where Hitler was standing. He then made an excuse that he had to take an important phone call and quietly left the room. At 12:34 p.m., another officer, Colonel Brandt, wanted to get a closer look at the map. He found the briefcase was in his way, so he kicked it. He pushed it farther under the table, so it ended up on the other side of the thick, solid oak table leg. This was the second domino. At 12:37 p.m., the acid finally burned through the wire. The bomb exploded, killing 4 men in the room. Hitler was thrown across the room by the blast, but survived. He had burst eardrums and his trousers were burned and tattered, but the heavy table leg had shielded him from the main force of the explosion. At 12:38 p.m., standing outside, Stauffenberg saw smoke and debris fly out of the building. He assumed that no one could have survived and that Hitler was dead. He confidently bluffed his way past 2 security checkpoints and rushed to the airfield. By 1:15 p.m., his plane was in the air, flying back to Berlin. He believed the most difficult part of the plan was over and that he would be returning to a hero's welcome. But back in Berlin, General Olbricht hesitated. He waited for 3 hours for confirmation that Hitler was dead, but that confirmation could only come from Stauffenberg. who was still in the air. By 4 p.m., radio messages started coming from the Wolf's lair. The Führer is alive. The coup began to fall apart even faster than it had been put together. The plan failed for 3 main reasons. First, communications were a critical problem. Even though the bomb destroyed much of the briefing hut, a key radio bunker nearby was not damaged. This allowed officers loyal to Hitler to quickly transmit the message that he had survived. Once this news spread, the spell of the coup was broken, and people were no longer willing to follow the conspirators' orders. Second, the personalities of key figures played a major role. General Fromm, who was the commander of the replacement army and Stauffenberg's boss, was a crucial part of the plan. He had initially agreed to support the coup and signed the first Valkyrie orders, but as soon as he received a phone call and heard Hitler's own voice, he immediately switched sides to save himself. He arrested Stauffenberg's co-conspirators like Beck and Olbricht. Third, the coup lost all momentum. For a takeover to succeed, it needs to seem powerful and unstoppable from the very beginning. This one hesitated right away. A unit of soldiers led by Major Rommel was sent to surround the army headquarters in Berlin. But when they got there, they found the conspirators arguing about the exact wording of their commands. Major Rommel was then connected directly by phone to Hitler himself, who confirmed his loyalty. Rommel's soldiers then turned their guns on the plotters inside the building. By 11 p.m. that same night, the coup was completely over. Stauffenberg, who had been shot in the shoulder during the chaos, was captured. He and his fellow leaders were dragged into the courtyard of the building and executed by a firing squad using rifles that had flashlights taped to them for light. His last words before he died were a shout, "Long live sacred Germany!" In the days and weeks that followed, the crackdown was brutal. Around 7,000 people were arrested, and many were gruesomely executed on meat hooks, with the executions filmed for Hitler to watch. After the failed plot, a special court led by a fanatical judge named Roland Freisler was set up. It became a place of humiliation and screaming, not justice. The families of those found guilty were even sent bills to pay for the cost of the ropes used to hang them. In total, it's estimated that about 5,000 people were executed. The purge was so extensive that even the children of some plotters were killed for minor acts like handing out pamphlets. The famous General Erwin Rommel, who was suspected of having knowledge of the plot, was given a choice. He could commit suicide by taking poison and receive a state funeral to protect his family's honor, or he could face public trial and disgrace. He chose the poison. The war continued for another 9 brutal months, during which an additional 4 million people died. We can only wonder what might have happened if the plot had succeeded. Would the Allies have been willing to negotiate a peace treaty? It's likely they would not have. Leaders like Roosevelt and Churchill were more worried about making a separate deal that would anger their ally, Joseph Stalin. Still, if the war had ended earlier, the Holocaust might have been stopped sooner, and the Soviet Union's control over Eastern Europe, the Iron Curtain, might have stopped at the Vistula River in Poland instead of the Elbe River in Germany. For many years after the war, in West Germany, the plotters were officially considered traitors. It wasn't until 1955 that the German military changed the official story and began to honor them as heroes. Today, people lay white roses on the cobblestones in the Bendler Block courtyard, where Stauffenberg was executed. The actual scorched briefcase from the bombing is on display in the German Historical Museum, a simple, everyday object that came incredibly close to changing the world forever. The story of Operation Valkyrie is a powerful lesson in how institutions can protect a country. Hitler survived the assassination attempt because a simple piece of furniture, a table leg, physically blocked the force of the bomb's blast. In a similar way, healthy democracies survive because they have boring but essential rules and procedures. Things like parliamentary debates, court reviews, and a free press act like that table leg. They absorb and redirect the dangerous blasts of political ambition. If you remove those protections, even a plan with noble goals can end in disaster. Stauffenberg's personal story also shows that people have the capacity to change their minds. He was a loyal soldier who fought for Hitler's regime until he could no longer ignore the evil it was committing. At that point, he chose to act. In our modern world, where we see leaders trying to bend rules and take constitutional shortcuts, the story of Valkyrie serves as a critical warning. It reminds us that democracies can start to die slowly and secretly, long before any open crisis becomes obvious. It makes us ask a challenging question. If a slow-burning fuse were lit in our own society today, would we be paying close enough attention to notice it? There are several common myths about the 20th of July plot. One myth is that the bomb was too small to have ever killed Hitler. However, post-war tests and reconstructions have shown that if the briefcase had not been moved behind the table leg, the blast would have been powerful enough to kill everyone in the room. Another myth is that Stauffenberg was a lone wolf who acted by himself. In reality, he was part of a large network of over 200 officers, with contacts and supporters in cities from Vienna to Paris. A third myth is that the Allies knew all about the plot and chose to do nothing. While Allied intelligence had picked up some hints of unrest within the German military, they had no specific details about who was involved or when an attempt would take place. A common myth concerns General Rommel, suggesting he was the leader of the plot. The truth is that while he was sympathetic to the cause and disliked Hitler, he ultimately refused to actively participate. His name was only revealed to the Gestapo after other conspirators were tortured. Finally, there is a myth that Valkyrie was always intended to be a suicide mission for Stauffenberg. This is not true. He had packed his formal dress uniforms in his luggage for the return trip to Berlin because he fully expected to survive and take on a leading role in the new government. This shows that hope alone is not enough. A successful plan needs backups and redundancies, not just a reliance on miracles. Let's imagine what could have happened if things had gone differently. If the briefcase had not been moved, Hitler would have died. By chance, his propaganda minister Goebbels was also with him that day, so both would have been killed, a double blow to the Nazi leadership. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, would have likely tried to seize power, but he did not have the same magnetic, almost magical hold over the German people that Hitler did. The Valkyrie orders to take over the government would have been issued 3 hours earlier, giving the conspirators a critical head start. They could have seized the SS headquarters and controlled the radio stations, broadcasting a message that a rogue group within the SS had staged a coup. The Allies might have been more willing to listen. In this best-case scenario, the war might have ended by January 1945. The Auschwitz concentration camp could have been liberated 6 months earlier, saving countless lives. The Iron Curtain might have fallen much farther to the east, perhaps changing the entire landscape of the Cold War. Of course, there was a worst-case scenario. Hitler's death could have triggered a brutal civil war within Germany, leading to even more chaos and destruction. No matter the outcome, it is incredible to think that the course of history turned on the position of a single table leg. Every year on July 20th at noon, a solemn ceremony takes place in Germany. Soldiers of the modern German army lay wreaths in the Bendler Block courtyard where Stauffenberg was executed. There is no music, just the sharp, respectful sound of their boots on the stone. In 2020, German Chancellor Angela Merkel stated, "Remembering is a responsibility." The story of the plot is now part of German life. Streets and military barracks are named after the conspirators, and kids in school even perform plays about the event, reenacting the tense minutes of the ticking fuse. Memory can be selective, but Operation Valkyrie has evolved into a key part of Germany's civic identity. It teaches a vital lesson. True patriotism sometimes requires saying no to the government and its symbols when they have been corrupted by evil.